Hi there and welcome back to my channel. This is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer. This is my month in review video for January. I'll go through each book I read for the month, not in order of reads this time, because this year I have different challenges I've set myself. So I'll structure this video by challenge. I'll have different groups, different sections in this video. I'll go through each challenge, the books I read for that challenge. Then I'll talk about the books I'm going to read coming up in the next month for the challenge. And then also have different sections for other books as well. So it'll be a different structure to the videos from now on. Let's not waste any more time in this video. Let's get straight to the books. The first challenge I want to mention is the monthly prompt challenge. Now for each month I have a single prompt, I have a must-read book, and then I have a second book as well if I have time. And the prompt for January was, start the year with a book that takes you somewhere completely new, whether it's a fantasy world, a futuristic setting, or a country you never visited. My must-read book for this prompt was Dune. If I had time, it was The Hobbit. I didn't have time to read the second book this month, just didn't have time at all. I did read Dune, however. Now what did I think of Dune? So of course Dune was published many decades ago in the 1960s, and I think 1965. When you think about what was going on in the world when Dune was published, that was influence for this book. So we had the Cold War. Of course, there's other influences as well. I mean, I've read mention of Paul Atreides being influenced by Lawrence of Arabia, that character, a foreign person, being welcomed into the native people, if you want to put it that way, of the land, and then becoming a leader of those native people as well. That's influenced by that Lawrence of Arabia story. There's other influences in there as well, of course. I mean, there's also things about scarcity of resources, and during the Cold War, especially during that time this book was published, I think it was scarcity of oil that was going on in the world. People were concerned about that. So I think that the spice on the world in Dune, I think that's, just oil really in our world. So I think that's Frank Herbert being influenced by many different things when he wrote this book. There's other influences as well. I haven't mentioned them all in this short description, but you can kind of see just how many things he's pulling into this story, what made up this story when it was first written and first published. There are so many themes in this book as well, too many to mention in this video, but they're all well written, they all feel real, and I just love the whole structure of this story. I love the way that all the themes, all the concepts are written in a way that it feels like part of the world we're given in this story. So I should mention for this prompt, it meets the prompt because Dune is set in the future. It's set in the future, set on another world, but I think when you think about when it's set, I think in the history of Dune, this is like the year 10,300 and something like that. And I think so it's so far in the future. Of course, humans have space travel, all that sort of thing. So even though this book is sci-fi, it's not sci-fi battle scenes. It's not like spaceships flying through space with battles and all that sort of thing going on. It's more a saga, more a space opera. But I like that. I like the way this is structured. It's character driven and the characters propel you through this story. It's very compelling the way the characters are written because they do feel real. There are real challenges they have to face. There are real outcomes, real consequences. And we have a thing in this book about fatalism. Should Paul Atreides accept his fate? There's a prophecy about him, it seems. And should he accept that? Should other characters accept their fate as well? Or do people make their own fate, their own destiny? That's a big theme in this book, I think. And we get that very much in the storyline of Paul Atreides, our main character in this story. A lot to like about this book. I think it's so gripping, so compelling. The characters are brilliant. The world building in this book is so good. I just love this book so much. That was my read for the prompt for January. Now, what about February? What's the prompt? Let's remind ourselves of that now. Read a book about love that's unconventional, messy, or unexpected, whether it's romance, friendship, or love of a place or passion. So for February, I chose The Time Traveler's Wife as my first read, my must read. If I have time, I'll read Call Me By Your Name. So there you have the first monthly prompt done and dusted, and we're moving forward to the next prompt. If you want to join in on those prompts, let me know. So okay. Let's move on to the next challenge. The next challenge I set for myself was random classic reads. So each month, 2 random classic books are assigned to me to read. They're picked from a list of about 50 books I think it was, and the random picking program picks 2 books each month from that list. In January, it picked Ivanhoe and Frankenstein. Let's discuss them now. So first, Ivanhoe? Well, Ivanhoe, I get why people enjoy this book. I mean, it celebrates chivalry. Now, who doesn't like a book about knights and quests and honour and all that sort of thing? It has that in this book. And then it also is a book about justice and also about acceptance of diversity, all that sort of thing. That is in this story as well. So for those things, I can see why people enjoy this story. There's a bit of adventure in there, there's some challenges, there is a little bit of excitement in there in different sections. We have jousting tournaments, all that sort of thing. But essentially, when you boil this down, when you take away those little segments that are a bit more exciting, this is just a romance story. Not insta-romance, it's a romance story that's a bit slow burn as well. So there's that for it as well. So I don't really like insta-romance in stories, so I'm glad it's not in this book. And also, it kind of felt a bit strange at the end because the characters that were developed very strongly in this book, I'm not saying they'll develop strongly on the romance side, but they were developed strongly. Those characters are basically forgotten or pushed away at the end. And we have two characters who weren't kind of the main characters in a way. They're the focus at the end of that romance. That felt a bit odd to me. So the structure-wise in this book, I don't think the structure was that good. There are things that are so big in the story and then forgotten. So for instance, John is a villain in this book for most of the story. A big villain, the main villain. We get to the end and his storyline is just cut off. It's like he vanishes. We don't know what happened to him. He's just gone off the stage and nobody knows what next. That was odd because he was built up so much. So much of the story revolves around this character, what he's doing in the book, then he's just gone. Like the snap of a finger, gone. And then Rebecca. Rebecca was a brilliant character in this story, so well developed, and so much revolved around her as well. She was a strong character, a strong female character in this story, has agency, has independence, is just so strong in the book. And then she kind of just walks off and then forgotten about. We don't know what happened to her. We don't get a closure on her storyline. Just those two things felt a bit strange to me. That's just two examples of other things as well in this story that are forgotten about and either underdeveloped or just snapped off the legs when they should be closed properly in the story. But there's good things in this book. It's not all bad. So even though I struggled with it, it's not all bad. In this book, we have characters that end up being Robin Hood and Friar Tuck, basically. And this book, people say this book gave us the modern ideas of Robin Hood and Friar Tuck, and I think that's true. And I enjoy that. I mean, who doesn't like a good Robin Hood story? I know I do. So I like that I read something that's said to be the start of modern ideas about those two characters. I enjoy that in the story a lot. And I did enjoy the scenes of jousting tournaments. I thought they were really good. And there's one big scene as well about a fire. I enjoyed that. Even though it's a little bit staggered in a way, a little bit disjointed in how it's told, I enjoyed the overall concept of those scenes because they were a bit more exciting. Overall, I struggle with this book. I struggle with the writing style. I get that when it was first published, it's a writing style that people did enjoy, but I did struggle with it. I struggled with the story overall. I felt a little bit slow, a little bit, missing in pace a bit. The pace was off here and there. The parts that were meant to be exciting were exciting, but they were too small in the story. Wasn't enough of that. And it was just more about people meandering around things and just heavy descriptions. Big descriptions about things just all the time in the story. It felt like, you get a paragraph, a long paragraph about how somebody sat on a horse, that sort of thing. So for those reasons, I did struggle with the book overall. I enjoyed the concept. I get why people do like this book. I get why I don't like this book. But I just think for me, not a great start to my random classic reads for 2025. And then I read Frankenstein, and Frankenstein I enjoyed more than Ivanhoe, have to say that. But I didn't find this book amazing either. I thought it was good, and I enjoyed certain things in the story, but it wasn't amazing to me. And I think when you read this, you have to think back to what frightened people back in the day when it was first published. And I think different things frighten people then than they do now. But I think that concept of a stranger, an other who's different, lurking around in the dark and killing people, that's scary now as well, I think, in stories. So I think that's true to horror, and I think that's the real horror concept in this book. We also have the horror about Frankenstein, about Victor Frankenstein, and he's diving deeper and deeper into isolation and madness. He has scenes of madness, of mania, where he's bedridden for months, many times in this story. And I think that deep dive into his psyche, into the consequences of his own actions in most cases, that is interesting, I think, in this story. So in this book, I enjoyed other concepts, not so much the horror. So even though I found certain things about the horror, compelling and engaging, I didn't find it that deep. I didn't find it deep and dark. I found it a bit tame in comparison to horrors I usually do enjoy. I didn't even find the book that gothic really, so even though we have scenes in darkness and with fog and mist and all that sort of thing, I didn't find the book truly gothic to a sense for me, for my liking anyway. But I did enjoy certain concepts in this book. So I enjoyed the concept, the discussion about nature versus nurture, what drives people to act in the way they do. I enjoy the concept about evil. Is evil born or is evil created later on? Do you learn evil, learn to be evil, or are you evil when you're born? I enjoyed that discussion in the story as well, and that really comes about in the creature, so Frankenstein's creature, in the way he acts, in his behaviour, how he learns things. Is he just a blank slate when he's first awoken, when he's first born into the world? And does his behaviour get developed because of things that happen to him? I mean, he's forgotten, he's isolated, he's looking for Frankenstein, he's trying to find his father, if you will, in the story. And on the way, things happen to him. I mean, he's cast aside, people don't like looking at him, people think he's terrifying, they run from him, they're horrified by him. And all those things just build up in him. And does that develop who he is more than what he was when he was created, when he was first born into the world? So those discussions for me were interesting. And then discussions about ethics in medicine and in science, even philosophy. And we get a bit about that in Victor's mind, don't we, in this story? So we get his thoughts. We get his thoughts when he's trying to first create his creature. He's diving into it, he's obsessed by it, he ignores everything else. He shuts himself out from the world and he's in his own mind, in his own world. And that just spirals him into this mix, I think, of obsession and even insanity. And from that mix, from that toxic mix, if you will, he creates this thing, this creature. He ignores the good side of himself, I think, the good thoughts about thinking about ethics and morals and philosophy. He ignores all that, shuts it all down. He just thinks about one thing, that drive, that compulsion to be the best, to create something that nobody else has ever done, to be something different, to be a god, if you will, in the story. So for me, those things, I think, are more compelling for me than other things in the story. There are events in the book that are engaging, that are shocking, but they seem to me more foretold. So while they're shocking when they happen, they're going to happen. You can see it. So for me, that just takes away some of that impact in the book as well. So while I enjoyed it, I don't think it's amazing. I don't think it's horror royalty. It is worthy of being called a classic, I think, because there are themes and concepts in this book that are still relevant today, and they carry forward today in the same power, I think, as they are in this story. But I don't think this book is amazing. Okay, so January, done and dusted. 2 random classics for the month. What will happen in February? Let's find out. Let's pick the 2 books now. So first off, Decameron. Now, I think I know what this book is about loosely, and I don't think I'm looking forward to the read. If it's what I'm thinking about, I'm not looking forward to it. So I'll wait and see what I think about it when I start reading it and finish it. I mean, this is the thing about random picks. I'm not going to get books I'm looking forward to all the time. Okay, the second book now, let's find out what it is. So Bleak House. I don't know if I'm looking forward to this read. So I don't know. So maybe February, 2 classics of February, maybe both of them are not going to be my thing. We'll have to find out. But Bleak House, I think it's just going to be, the style I think is going to be a bit depressive maybe. So let's find out what I think when I read it. But anyway, I don't choose them. the picking program does. So there are 2 random classics for February. Let's move on to the next challenge, and that is the random country per month. And in January, that country was Sweden. I had 1 book to read by a Swedish author for the month, and I chose Dr. Glas, written by Hjalmar Soderberg. And I probably mispronounced that name, so sorry if I did. But anyway, this book. This book I think was first published in around 1905. But I think the way it's written and the themes in it, they're so relevant to today. There's so many things in this book that I think are still discussed, still big topics today. And big topics, I mean, there are people on both sides, I think, still fighting for what they think is correct in the themes and concepts in this book. So for instance, we have gender power and equality. So also in this book we have medical ethics and moral responsibility being discussed. We have discussions on loneliness, on isolation, we have discussions on life and death. We have all those things packed into this story. And it's not a long book. The version I read I think was just over 200 pages or so. So it's not a long book, but so much packed into this story. And it all revolves around this character, Dr. Glas. So in this book, this character, he isolates himself. He doesn't live away from people. He lives in a city, and he loves living in a city. He talks about the fact that he can't live in the country. He needs to live in a city. But despite living in a city where he's surrounded by people, he isolates himself for varying reasons. In some ways, those reasons are his own making. Sometimes he thinks of himself as being better, being different than other people. And there are scenes in this book where he sits in his apartment and he watches people and he kind of judges them as he's watching them from a distance. He watches them walk around on the street and he makes judgments on them. And in this book, he's a doctor, a medical doctor. And he thinks because he's a medical doctor, he has this sort of elevation. He elevates himself above other people as well. He can make decisions to help people. And when he makes decisions to help people, in this book, he starts thinking about acting like God in a way. That comes across in his thoughts. It doesn't come across in those blatant terms. He's not saying, I'm going to act like God or not. He's more thinking about what extremes he can go to help people in different situations. And can he go to the extreme of killing somebody? Is that okay? Can he play God with people's lives if he thinks he's helping somebody else? If he thinks he's doing away with somebody he finds repulsive, can it help somebody that he finds not repulsive? That's, when you boil it down, that's what it comes down to in this story, in his thoughts as well. So this character has grey morality. He's combating in himself these ideas. He's trying to embrace his medical ethics, but also he's trying to think about what he thinks morally is right and wrong. Is he right or wrong about what he's doing in the story? So for me, that is interesting in this book. It is compelling, it is engaging, and it makes this character so complex and just so multi-layered. So there's so many dimensions to this character, and you find out different things as you read through the story about this character as well. So for me, interesting story. I'm glad I read this. I'm glad this random country of Sweden made me pick this story to read, because I don't think I would have read this book otherwise. So we're done with the January random country pick. We've read a book from Sweden by a Swedish author. In a prior video, I've already selected each random country for each month this year. So in February, that country is Peru. So I have to find one book by an author who's born in Peru and read that for February. If you're interested to find out what that is, keep watching my channel. Look out for the monthly review video, or look out for the standalone book review for that book. So okay, on to the next challenge. The next challenge I'd set myself for this year is 6 randomly chosen books from my bookshelves to read each month. So I had 6 books for this month, and I read each one. And I'll go through those books one by one now in this section. The first book was Rose's Last Summer, written by Margaret Millar. Now, here's the book. So I have these books with me because they're from my bookshelves. Other books in this video may be from libraries or on Kindle, that sort of thing. I don't have physical copies. But here's the cover for this book. And as you can see, it's quite an outdated cover now, I think. I think it's still interesting in a way, but I don't think you'd find many covers like this in new books now. But to the book. The book is interesting, I think, and after I read this, I found out that Margaret Millar was considered one of the most prominent crime thriller writers in the mid-1950s, and I can see that because this book was very interesting. It was quite compelling, quite character-driven. The mystery is very tight, I think, very well done, but as the characters, the character motivations, the character psychology in this book is just amazing. The characters really just make this book what it is. That's what I think anyway. Margaret Millar has some sort of gift to write characters where you can feel they're loathsome. You can really dislike the characters. You can really enjoy the characters as well. But there's something about the characters that just feels so real. And I think it's down to their motivations and their psychology, as I mentioned just before. They have grey morality, and I think I'm drawn to those characters somewhat, for some genres anyway. Those characters that you don't know what's coming next. And I think in books like this, that just has more impact in a story. So I enjoy that whole construction of those characters in this book very much. And also in this book, I like that the author took a shot at Hollywood. That concept in Hollywood that they say that when a female actor is a certain age, they're cast aside, they're deemed not worthy of roles, not worthy of attention. And that was discussed in this book to great detail, I think. And Margaret Millar really took a shot at that and said, well, hang on, you're treating people wrong. You know, people who are aging, they're still worth something. And I enjoy that in this story because I believe that. I mean, there's no reason why in industries, why they say you're a certain age, you're out, no one's interested. That's just dreadful, I think. The second random pick for my bookshelves for January was 7 Seconds, written by Jack Henderson. So here's the book. Now, this book I found out was a sequel. I didn't realise it was a sequel when I first got this from a charity book sale. Goodreads didn't mention it's a sequel, but apparently it is. So even though the book is a sequel, I don't think I missed out on anything by not reading the first book. I think it's one of those books where, even though it's a sequel, some characters are in this book and the first book. The book itself works as a standalone story, and I think that's why I don't think I missed out on anything by reading this book first. I do want to try and find the first book. I don't know how hard it will be to try to find that, but I want to find a copy of that and read that as well, just to complete the series out. And I think there's only 2 books in the series with those characters. This story is a typical action thriller. It has a technical bent to it as well. Those tech details aren't that heavy, aren't that dense, so it is accessible to many readers. I think the last third of the story is the best, has the best characters for me, the better scenes for me in there as well. It's really where it gets going, I think, on the action thriller side. I think there's like a long lead up to that last third, and that long lead up I think has a few sections where the pace kind of is a bit skew if you want. You know, the pace isn't the best leading up to the last third of the story. Bit disappointing in that way, but overall as a story, with its structure, the way it plays out, the way the characters are, their motivations, their reactions, all that sort of thing, I think it's a decent story. It's strong enough, it kept me interested, kept me going with it, and overall I enjoyed the read. The next random read from my shelves was Eye of the Beholder, written by David Ellis. Here's the book. Now, David Ellis is one of my favourite authors. He's getting to be a great author for me. I love all his books. All the books I've read anyway from him, I love. This book I think is amazing. Not his best, but still amazing. I love the concept. So it's all about a serial killer, and I love serial killer stories. Fiction, non-fiction, whatever, I love serial killer stories. And there's 2 sections in this book. The first section is a serial killer story where they know who the killer is. So it's not about the chase, not about the hunt, just about trying to find the right clues and convict him. And those clues are already there, really, they're blatant. It's obvious. So they have no problem convicting this character in that first section. The second section is different. Not as gruesome as the first section. I mean, the first section is quite gruesome. The second section is about a serial killer story again, but it's more about the hunt. The hunt to try to find the person before he keeps killing. And I enjoy that a lot. That's so compelling for me and so engaging. And also, it's about doubt. Did they convict the wrong person all those years ago? And I think both sections, there's a gap of about 15 years, I think, between both sections. And it's all about doubt. Did our protagonist convict the wrong person all those years ago? Did he build his career by convicting the wrong person? And those 2 things combined, that doubt, our protagonist having doubt and people doubting him even, and also the hunt to try to find this killer now who's killing in the present day. They're both compelling, engaging, and this book was even chilling in many sections. I enjoyed this very much. David Ellis as an author has a great way of writing characters. He writes characters that aren't perfect. They may think they're perfect at certain times, but then they have a crash, a fall, and they find out maybe they're not perfect, and then other people see that as well. And he has a way of other characters viewing characters in the story as well in different ways, and we see that in books that he writes. I like this book so much. I like David Ellis as an author so much. If you like David Ellis as an author, read this book. The next book I read was Big Little Lies, written by Liane Moriarty. Here's the book. This book was amazing. The structure of this story is just stunning. It's a brilliant structure, written so well with amazing characters. And the concept of this book is quite simple, I think. It's a mystery, a murder mystery, but not in the sense that we have somebody hunting for clues and trying to solve the murder right through the story. It's one of those books where we know someone's died, and then it's leading us up to that point to find out what happened. And then ultimately we find out who the culprit is. But it's that lead up to the big event that's so compelling and engaging, and it's all down to characters. The characters in this book, they're real. They feel so real because they're flawed. They're not perfect. And what makes it more interesting, and I enjoy it in stories so much, is when other characters view other characters and their perceptions may be different to what the character thinks of themselves. I enjoy that a lot in books. Happens, I think, in this story a few times, not that often. When it does happen though, it's very strong and very powerful. Also in the story, it's about secrets, the secrets behind closed doors, behind walls that other people may not see, and about how that impacts character lives, about people's lives as well. Because again, the characters in this book feel like real people. I can't say enough good things about this book. I mean, it's so well written. It's one of those books where it feels at the same time light-hearted, but also feels serious because it deals with serious topics. And I think the way it's written just tells us that readers don't need depressing books, don't need dark, depressing books to have serious topics discussed. We can have serious topics in a light-hearted book. And I think sometimes writing it that way is more impactful. Because when you have a style, a tone that's mostly light-hearted, mostly bright, and when you have serious things happening, I think those moments just hit harder because they stand out more. That contrast is so much broader, I think, between those two things. But other things in this book reminded me about teachers should be treated like they're saints. I mean, teachers do so much, I think, and teachers, I don't think, they don't get the recognition, they don't get the rewards I think they deserve. And I think teachers should be even revered more in life. I mean, most teachers, I think, are brilliant. I then read In the Name of Honor, written by Richard North Patterson. So here's the book again, and this is the first book by this author I've read. And I've got a few books from this author on my bookshelves, and some of the books are in the random list still, so they may pop up from time to time during the year. Now this book was interesting. It's a classic legal thriller. It's set in the military, so it has that kind of bent to it. It makes it more interesting, I think, because we have a court-martial case, a possible court-martial case going on. So it's all about this officer in the military, and he's being accused of murdering his senior officer, the person he reports to. He's claiming self-defense, and he uses PTSD as part of that defense. So what I like about this book and how it brings in PTSD into the story, it brings in that idea, that notion. And even though I say idea and notion, I do agree that it's real. I just say idea and notion because it is an idea and a notion in this story. It's a part of the story, that's what I'm trying to say. But it brings it in, and brings it in a way where it talks about facts. It talks about facts of that condition. It doesn't, try to oversimplify it. It doesn't try to bring things in and make it more dramatic and bring things in to make it feel unreal. It brings in facts about it. It feels real in the story. And I really appreciated that because it just feels like the author's done research on that to bring it in and bring it into this situation in the military, where in the military, you don't always get the impression that the military treats PTSD in the way it should, or even believes it exists sometimes. That discussion in this book was really well done. and I think it needs to be there, and it adds so much to this story overall. The story itself, I think, is structured just like a legal thriller, and it felt like almost a legal procedural. You know, when you think about police procedurals and they just follow certain things, they investigate things, avenues, you know, investigate characters, clues, come back if they're not going anywhere, and just follow that procedural type story. This felt like that just in legal terms. We had witnesses on the stand being examined and cross-examined. We had all that going on in certain sections of the story. And of course this book has an overarching mystery. You know, was this person acting out of self-defense or not? That's the big mystery that holds the whole story together. At the end though, of this story, we have some twists and turns. And while those twists and turns I think were okay, they're a little bit shocking. The tone and feel of that twist and turn section at the end doesn't match the tone and feel of the rest of the story. So while I enjoyed both sections, and I split that up into those two sections, you know, the crime, the investigation, the court case, and then the twists, I enjoyed all of that. Because they're disjointed, it decreases my overall view of the book as a whole. But as stories go, entertaining, good characters, great idea, a good way to bring PTSD into the discussion as well, and I think overall, great read. The last random pick from my shelves was Shrike, written by Joe Donnelly. So here's the book. It's a horror, and it's one of those horrors where it has a real 90s vibe, and I think it was published in the 90s as well. And I do like horrors that have that 90s vibe. I'm drawn to them. It's a horror that's set in a small town in Scotland. It's a creature horror, a creature feature, if you will. And there are many scenes where this creature is attacking and killing people. And those kind of things, those concepts in horror, I really do enjoy. I like creature feature movies. I like creature feature stories in books. So for me, that drew me into the story very much. But even though I enjoyed this story a lot, there are some things that let it down. So we have attacks on people being told in multiple ways, more than once in the book. So we have seeing it for the first time. We see the attack in real time, if you will. Then we see it again through another character. I won't go into details of how that happens in this short description, but we see it more than once, and it happens many times in this book. For me, a better choice would be pick one way of seeing it and go with it for each attack. I understand why we have the second view of the attacks. It's there to drive certain things in the book. We need that. But maybe just have that. I mean, if it's so powerful that we need to see it through that character, then just do that. Don't have it in real time. Or if you have it in real time, you don't need to show the same thing again with another character, seeing it in a different way. So for me, it just felt odd to have one kind of attack by a creature on one person being shown in different ways, you know, multiple ways through the story. Just felt like filler, felt like padding in the book in some ways. And then we also have a police investigation. So not just about horror and a creature attacking people, we have a police investigation. And I enjoyed that because it made it feel real in the story. It brings, you know, more grounding to the horror elements in the book. But what I didn't like about the police investigation is the police infighting. We have our main character, Jack Fallon, on the police force, and he's trying to investigate these crimes, and they don't know they're by a creature. They just think some madman running around, you know, attacking people, killing people, all that sort of thing in their small town. But this character often wants to bring in other people to help, other resources, and his superior in the force always says no. There's infighting with those two characters constantly through the story. I get why it's there to add different layers, add drama, all that sort of thing. But, you know, just when's the point where you say enough is enough? Either get past it and bring people in, other characters in, or you draw a line and say, okay, we're not going to do that. We won't discuss it all the way through the story time and time again, because it just happens so often. I just felt repetitive in the book. So it just didn't go anywhere, and it just felt like there was more filler in the story in some ways. So even though I enjoy the horror elements very much, I enjoy the atmosphere, I enjoy the settings, I enjoy characters, not all characters, but most characters. There's so much in this book to enjoy. There are one or two things I think just pull me out of the story every now and then and just drag me away from atmosphere and tension, those edge of the seat moments. So overall, good concept, good story, Just a few things that just don't make me think this is amazing as it should be. There you have the random bookshelf reads that I read in January. What's in store for February? Let's find out and pick those random books, those 6 random books from my shelves. Let's start now with the first book. The first book is Morning Star, written by Peter Atkins. What I recall from the top of my head, it's a horror. I don't know really anything else about it, but I think it's a horror. Let's go with book 2. Dark Lady, written by Richard North Patterson. So I read one of his books in January as a random pick, now another book in February. I'm looking forward to this because I enjoyed that book in January enough to want to read many more books by the same author. Let's go with book 3. Prophecy, written by John Kilgallen. I think it's a horror or paranormal, not 100% sure. Definitely find out anyway in February. Let's go with book 4. The Golden Rendezvous, written by Alistair MacLean. So I've got a few Alistair MacLean books in this list. Hopefully, I don't know how many will be picked during the year. Looking forward to this book a lot because I just want to read some of his books. I hear many things about his stories. I want to read them. Okay, let's go with book 5. Caravan to Fakaris, another Alistair MacLean book, so 2 for February. I wonder if we can get 3 because I think there may be about 6 or 7 books by this author in my random list to select from. Let's see what happens for book 6. The Boy Who Killed Demons, written by Dave Zeltzman. Look, I don't know much about this story. I saw this at a charity book sale. I love the title. The cover was interesting, so I picked up the book and decided to get it. I don't know really anything else about the book, but of course I'll find out in February. So there are the 6 random picks from my bookshelves for February. If you're interested to see what I think about these books, look out for the month in review video for February. And also look out for the standalone book reviews on those books as well. Let's move on to the next section of this video, and it's about the author deep dives. So at the start of the year, I had author deep dives where I had different authors in different categories, and a random program picked one author from those categories to really focus on for 2025. And also I had 3 other authors, all horror authors, where 5 random books were picked from the collection on my shelves. I have to read them as well during the year. In January, I didn't make much progress in either of those things, so I didn't read any of those 5 books from those 3 horror authors, and that's a bit of a letdown, I think, for myself. So I have to focus and try to get some of those books read in February. I really hope I do get a chance to read more of those books, or some of them anyway. But for the deep dive authors as well, the only book I read was one book from Ian Rankin, and he was a deep dive in the crime genre. I read the first book in his series. It's called Knots and Crosses. I didn't read any books from the other authors I'm meant to be reading for the year. So I think it was Clive Cussler, and I think the other one was Catherine Kurtz. So I have to read books from those 2 authors as well. So anyway, Knots and Crosses, let's describe that now. It's the first book in the Inspector Rebus series. So I'm going to take a guess and say that the series wasn't called the Inspector Rebus series at the start, because the character's not an inspector in this book, he's a detective. Anyway, this book is set in Scotland, I think in Edinburgh, and the character is that typical kind of character you see in many crime books or crime series. he's got issues, he's got problems, he's got angst. In this book, he also has trauma, and many characters, many protagonists in series like this or books like this do carry trauma. But I found it interesting that the trauma he carries is hidden. So hidden in a way that there's memories that he's hiding, that are hidden. He can't recall what happened. He can't recall every event that formed this trauma in his mind. And that's part of the issue with him as well, part of what makes him broken as a character. He also drinks a bit too much. He also smokes. He doesn't have the best attitude all the time to his police work, all that sort of thing. So there's many reasons why this character is not perfect. But it's all those imperfections, I think, that make him engaging. And the way he's written in the story as well makes him engaging. And overall, this story has a gritty feel to it, kind of like a dark and grey atmospheric feel to it. And I enjoy that in this book very much. But it's not just a crime book. So there is a crime, and it is quite a serious crime. It does become personal to our protagonist, and in many crime series I think that's a definite choice authors make, because making it personal to our protagonist in the book just drags you into that protagonist more and more. So a definite choice by the author to have that personal feel to the crimes going on in the story in the first book of a series. But as I said, the book is not just about the mystery or the crime. This book is also about society. It also discusses society in general. We have descriptions of a town, a city, that's kind of falling apart in some ways. Some sections are bright and green, some sections are crumbling and they're grey. We have the concept of the haves and the have-nots. And I hate saying those terms, have and have-nots, but I guess that's the best way to convey it sometimes in a few words. But we get that in this book very much. And all that going on in a very short book, not a long book at all. So it's got a lot packed into it. We have interesting crime going on. When I say interesting, I mean compelling and engaging. Not interesting as that the crime is just wonderful, all that sort of thing. But the investigation, the build up to it, the finding out who the culprit is, all that is engaging and interesting and compelling in the story. So everything that goes on in this book is there for a purpose. It's very well written, very tight, very controlled. And even though I can get a sense that the author kind of wrote this thinking it would be a standalone, like one book, that nobody may be interested enough to have a second book or a third book, whatever, in the series. I also get a sense this author wrote it in a way knowing this book would work. The book would be successful. And I just get that sense in the story. I get both senses. And I think the author may have hedged his bets a bit, but I think in his mind he kind of knew already this book would succeed. And of course it did, because this series is very long running. And you can tell why, because this book is so engaging and just so compelling. So in January, I also read some books that are long listed for the Indie Book Awards. Now, these awards are an Australian award, and what I enjoy about this book award is it includes genre fiction. It includes all types of books, and there's different categories. There's debut fiction, there's best adult fiction, there's YA category, there's all different categories in this book award. And on my channel already, I have a video that describes this award in a certain level of detail, but I also might put together a longer version of that video and go into more detail about the award. But if you want to learn more about the award, check out the video on my channel. But anyway, I did read a few books that were long listed for different categories for this award. And one of those books is Tilda is Visible, written by Jane Tara. Now, this book, after I read this book, I felt like I sat through infomercials, hours worth of infomercials about yoga, about meditation, and about self-help. And that just had an effect on me where I just was frustrated by it. I didn't want to know anything else about those things. I wanted to shut myself down and just not learn anything else or hear anything else about meditation, yoga, and self-help, because I felt like for the whole book I was being hit over the head about how wonderful all those things are. And it just was too much in the story. But essentially this book is about people becoming invisible, and primarily about women of a certain age becoming invisible in life. People either ignoring them, not seeing them. And what happens then is they get a condition called invisibility, that's what they call it, and they start to disappear. So different parts of their body start to vanish from sight. So somebody could be walking around. So in this book, Tilda, she first notices it, I think, because I think it's one of her ears vanishes. She looks in a mirror and sees one ear is missing. And then as the book progresses, other body parts start to just disappear. They're still there, just nobody can see them. And it's happening to many women in the world. And it happens to some men, but mostly women in this story. It's all about that concept, that notion about people becoming invisible at a certain age, people ignoring them, about people just not being needed or wanted by anybody, and they're just unseen. That was an interesting way of discussing that in the story, and I just found that unique approach quite interesting and quite compelling. That's what I enjoyed about this book. But the thing I don't like about this book is it has that insta-love thing going on. We have a main character, Tilda, sees a guy at a coffee shop or a cafe somewhere. He falls in love with her by the way she closes a book. And then he's perfect. He's like Prince Charming in a fairy tale. He's great looking, dresses well, got a big house, he's rich. Everything about him is perfect. Even the way he acts, the way he speaks, the things he does, it's all perfect. There's nothing negative, nothing a bit different about the guy. There's no light and shade, it's all perfection. So that insta-love fairy tale romance thing wasn't that great for me in this story, wasn't that into it. I did like the discussion on the visibility of people. I thought that was great, and the way it was brought about in that unique way was just wonderful. But having insta-love, this decreases my overall enjoyment of this book. And also finishing the book, feeling like I've just sat through hours and hours of infomercials about yoga and meditation and self-help, that was a no-no as well. So for me, good concept, interesting story, but there's things about this book also that just made me feel exhausted and just a little bit annoyed as well. I then read Cherrywood, written by Jock Serong. It's an interesting mix of things in this story. It's part historical fiction, part magical realism, part romance. So I appreciate the author experimenting and taking that chance. The magical realism wasn't handled that well, I don't think. And I think certain things in the present timeline just weren't handled well overall. The past timeline with the character Thomas, that timeline was wonderful. If I had the book about that timeline only, it would have been amazing. Most of that is because of his character, Thomas, as a character in the story. His enthusiasm, his vibrancy, it was so engaging and so intoxicating in the story. It was wonderful. And through him, we get this idea of someone like a dreamer who's got a big idea. He wants to make it happen. He stops at nothing to make it happen. It's about the consequences of that. Is he forging ahead and ignoring other people, warning signs, other people's ideas and things? Or does he take those on board and make that dream bigger and better? And you get a consequence of that in that storyline. I won't go into those details, but that whole past storyline I thought was amazing. In the present storyline, we follow Martha. And while I say present storyline, it's in the 1990s in Melbourne. So a bit in the past, but not distant past. This character is meant to be a lawyer, meant to be analytical. And we're told that many times in her timeline. We're told that by the character herself as well. And so when she comes across this pub called the Cherrywood, and she finds out this pub has different properties that don't meet reality, and she just accepts that straight away, embraces it even. For me, that was a bit odd. It was contradictory to her character, and that's why some of the things in the present timeline, that 1990s timeline, didn't sit well with me, didn't seem to gel that well. And in this timeline as well, we have romance. So when she first ventures into this pub called Cherrywood, she meets Joey. And then it's like insta-love between them. They can't stop thinking about each other, and that drives Martha to try to find this pub over and over again. And that's where the magical realism comes into it, because the pub is not in the same spot. It keeps shifting. And in a way, it reminded me in a way of that book, The Faraway Tree. Enid Blyton, where the three children find this tree in the woods, and at the top of the tree, a different world kind of swirls around, and they find a different world all the time. That's what this Cherrywood pub reminds me of. And I don't know if the author was influenced by that or not, but that whole concept, that reminds me so strongly of those books. So for me, the magical realism, not the best. At the end, it goes off the rails, very much off the rails. And I think that romance felt a bit too insta. It felt too instant in the story. And I think that contradiction with the character Martha, accepting all these strange things going on so quickly, didn't sit right with who the character is in the story. So different things in that present timeline, not so enjoyable. The past timeline, brilliant. The last Indie Book Awards book I read in January was The Work, written by Bri Lee. I didn't really enjoy this book that much at all. When I first started this book, I thought, well, it's going to be a discussion. It's going to investigate or reveal characters and different concepts about the art world. We get an idea about the characters, the people who create art, the people who live in this world. And to a point, we had that. But apart from that, it's all about romance. So it's about insta-romance as well. And there's so many insta-romance books around. I don't know if it's just because the books I'm reading have that in there, but it feels like so many books, when it has romance involved, it's insta-romance. And maybe it's because books have a certain length. So how much time can you spend with characters realizing they love each other? Maybe you have to get to that point quickly to drive the plot forward. Maybe that's the whole reason. But I don't know, I just don't like that whole concept, that whole insta-love concept in stories. But anyway, this book we have two protagonists, and one lives in America, one lives in Australia, and they meet by chance at like an art world convention or something in New York. And they're connected straight away, instant connection, and they can't stand to be apart from each other, but they have to be because they work and live in different countries. In that romance story, we also have explicit scenes, many of them, and I didn't sign up to this book wanting that. And I don't know why they're there, because they add nothing to the story, add nothing at all. I think they're there to try to excite some readers, add some titillation or something in the book, but for me, they were pointless. Didn't need to be there, and so many of them. So that turned me off this book somewhat, having that in the story. In this book, there's also discussions about abuse of power and power dynamics, and I do like it's in this story. I mean, it needs to be talked about, but it's done quite clumsily, I think, in this book. It's also done in a way that suggests that only young generations, like millennials or younger, can recognize and appreciate things like that going on. It almost hints in this story that older generations, older than millennials, can see this and ignore it and accept it and move on. I mean, I find that concept just ridiculous. I find it insulting. To think that only young generations can see things and feel moved by it, can feel appalled by it, is just awful, I think, in a book. It just reeks to me of undeserved righteousness, like this author saying, I see this going on, you don't, and I need to tell you about it. It just kind of felt like this author's trying to convey to readers out there, older than she is, how badly we're behaving, or how wrong we are not to see things and call them out. I mean, just how misguided can somebody be in a story? To write that in a book just feels just totally wrong to me. So okay, let's talk about the other books I read in January. So first off, Clockwork Prince, written by Cassandra Clare. So it's book 2 of the Infernal Devices trilogy. And I'm reading this trilogy turnabout with the second trilogy from the Mortal Instruments. So I'm reading one book from this series, one book from the other series. This book takes away all the main things going on in book 1 and ignores that, and concentrates on subplots. And the reason these subplots are in this story, the reason this book is based on that, is because of a love triangle. The love triangle drives all the character motivations and actions in those subplots. So it drives the whole book, basically. So for me, that was an odd choice. I understand why the author did that. The author's trying to target the book, market it towards the target audience. So I get that. And maybe the target audience wants that. So fully appreciate why the book's written in that way. Doesn't mean I have to like it. And for me, it was just lacking in those main things that made the first book so interesting. I mean, there are good things in this story still. It's not bad. It's not a bad book. There are good moments in this story. And the best storyline, I think, is a character called Will. And he's trying to remove a curse cursey things being placed on him for 5 years. And that whole storyline, I've been trying to remove it, was compelling, sometimes chilling. It was very engaging. And I think because it was the storyline most removed from that love triangle. I mean, he's trying to remove this curse because he's in love with one of the other characters in the book. And he thinks by removing the curse, he can then, admit his love and they can be together. That's the whole reason for it, the motivation. But much of the storyline, that subplot, is not concentrating on that. It's concentrating on other things, bringing other elements into the story, other characters. That storyline is a bit darker, a bit deeper than other storylines in this book. And I enjoyed that whole thing going on in this story. We also had the development of Sophie's character, and in this book, Sophie is a maid. She's also what they call a mundane, so a character who's human, who's not paranormal in any way. And in these series, I find sometimes the mundane characters aren't developed very well. So to have that character, this Sophie character, developed strongly in this book was so different and made her stand out so much in this story. Also, being historical and having a maid character in a historical setting being developed as a major character in this book, I thought was amazing, a great choice. Because we have another female character who's strong, she's a character who's a mundane, and also she's a female character in a historic setting, in a profession that's sometimes cast aside and pushed aside and forgotten about. So to have that development in this book, I thought was a great choice, and it made Sophie a standout character, and she really is a great character in this story. The historical setting wasn't so immersive this time. Book 1, it was better, but in this book, it just concentrates on things like corsets and hats and dresses and things. If it mentions that in the book, it's historical. That's what it felt like in this book. But I guess this book's trying to be more character driven, trying to, really embrace and attract the target audience. And I think trying to make it feel maybe a bit more modern in a way is the best way to do that sometimes with books like this. So I think in all those ways it works as a book, but for me it doesn't work as strongly as the first book in the trilogy, and I wonder what the third book is going to be like. Killing Time, written by R.W. Green and M.C. Beaton, and I say R.W. Green first, he wrote the book. It is based on characters and ideas from M.C. Beaton, but R.W. Green did the heavy work. Anyway, this book is book 35 in the Agatha Raisin series. Very long running. I mean, how many more books can we have in this series? Part of me hopes it keeps going and going and going. Then after this book, part of me thinks, well, how long can it go for? Is it time to call time and finish it? Because this book wasn't that great. And this book, the cozy elements, so in a cozy mystery, which this is, the cozy elements need to be good, need to be consistent. And the cozy elements in this book felt so different to the rest of the series. Now, I don't mind if a book tries to change things up in a series now and again, but this was vastly different, too different. And it kind of felt like the author was deliberately trying to push everything away from Agatha's home setting, the village of Carsley. And I don't know why that was a choice, because I think this series is stronger when the cozy elements take place in Carsley, and even when the mysteries take place in Carsley, I think it's stronger as well. Like Carsley or the surrounding villages, I think the series is stronger. There are 3 mysteries in this book, with one mystery being an historical mystery, but that historical mystery really adds nothing to the story. It's there, I think, to be more a curiosity in the book more than anything else, and in those sections it kind of feels like the author was taking chunks out of historical text and summarizing them and chucking them in the book and saying, that's part of my story. That's what it felt like. It felt odd, it felt disjointed from the rest of the book and disjointed from the whole series overall. It's there to drag in Sir Charles into the story and to make us think that Sir Charles is interested in Agatha romantically again. That's what it's there for. And it's there to show that Agatha is ignoring that. She realizes what's going on, doesn't want Sir Charles, she's not interested. It's there to show that as well, to show Agatha is independent and strong. So it's there for a reason, but it just feels very disjointed from the rest of the story. So not a good choice, I think, in a book like this. So overall, this book doesn't fit with the rest of the series, and I do wonder how many more books can be published in this series. A Serial Killer's Guide to Marriage, written by Asia Mackay. An arc read for me in January, and a unique way of embracing a concept. The concept in this book is about how much do you compromise, or how much do you give into or give away when you have a long-term relationship or a marriage or whatever. How much do you lose of yourself, and how much do you accept from the other person? It's all about that. And to make it unique in this book, the two characters who are married, they were once serial killers, and they've stopped now because they've had a baby. And this book is all about them trying to embrace what they think of as a normal life, a different life, trying to curb those urges to go out and kill people, because they both enjoyed it so much in their past, and now they've agreed they'll stop until their daughter, their baby, is old enough to leave home and go to college or whatever. So they've got many years ahead of them where they can't do the thing they really love. There's a lot to like about this book. The writing style is slick and sharp. It's got great pace. It's very accessible as a story, but it relies heavily on the miscommunication trope. I mean, very heavily. The whole concept is based around that. If you don't like that trope, don't read this book. I mean, it is excessive in how much it relies upon that trope. I didn't so much mind the trope in this book being used, but it felt odd because so many times in this story we're told the two characters are soulmates. They're perfect for each other. If they're so perfect for each other, why do we have miscommunication so often in the story? I mean, all the time. Why does that drive the whole plot? That was the only thing I had with this book, was a sticking point. Other than that, it's a great read. It was engaging, it was compelling. It had a kind of a light-hearted feel to it in the way it was told. And that was interesting because there are serious topics going on in this story, but it had a light-hearted feel to it. So it felt modern in a way to me as well in that way. But that thing about them being perfect for each other and then miscommunicating, that didn't gel so well in the story for me. Daughter of Chaos, written by Sarah Rees Brennan. So it's book 2 based on the TV series The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Now this book I think has progressed to a point in that TV series I've not watched yet, but it doesn't spoil the read for me. I still think this book is well worth reading. It's a great story. It is dark and paranormal, even horror. It's a YA book, so it has teen characters, and they do feel like teenagers. And I think the author has taken those characters and done a great job, because so often you see books with teenage characters or child characters, they're not written to suit their ages in the story. But in this book, every character is written very well, and the characters are very complex. I especially like in this book the character Harvey. He's written so well in this story. I like his complexity, I like his layers. There's so much going on for the character in the story. I really like the scenes where we have Harvey and we have a warlock character called Nick Scratch. And they're both trying to help each other. And Harvey's trying to help Nick Scratch become a bit more human in how he interacts with Sabrina, because Nick wants to date Sabrina, we're told. He wants to be more accessible. He wants to be more attractive to Sabrina. And he realizes he has to act more human, not like a warlock. So we have Harvey trying to help Nick with that. And in this book, it's almost like they have a bromance. They really do. And really, these two characters, Nick and Harvey, should just be a couple. And why not? It feels like they're a couple anyway in the story, in their scenes. So why not make that happen in the story? And then other things going on in the book as well. I mean, we have the whole discussion on family, whether it's biological, whether it's found family. We have characters who are just yearning for family, yearning for connection. And they're looking for it in any way in this story. And that was good, I think, in a book like this, because it just paints this picture that family, that connections don't have to be by blood. They can be found family. They can be friendships. Sometimes friendships can be stronger than family. We have that going on in the story as well to a very deep level. So many things being discussed in this book. But of course, we have dark elements going on. We have paranormal things going on. We have dangers. We have other things going on in the book other than teenagers running around and being teenagers. And like I said, they feel like teenagers in this story. There you have all the books I read in January. I wonder, have you read any of those books? What did you think? What were your favourite reads from January? Let me know. I've also talked about the books from those challenges I'll read in February. If you're interested in those books, let me know. If you read them, let me know, tell me your thoughts on them. And I'll talk about those books more as the month progresses, and definitely they'll be in the month review video for February. On my channel, I review books of all different genres. Check out my channel and subscribe. On the screen now is a link to another video for a book I'm sure you'll enjoy.